Your time.
Ready, good. All right, thank you. All right, we're going to call the meeting to order, and we'll first start off with a roll call vote. A roll call.
Good afternoon, members. Thank you for being with us tonight. Because this is a public hearing and we are doing hybrid, we're going to need to have members just say your name and then just tell me whether you're in person or on Zoom. We only need to do this first for the roll call, and then unless somebody makes a move, then we don't have to do it again tonight. So we'll start with Bill Bruce.
Bill Bruce in person here.
Jim Ferraro.
In person.
Lauren Fitzpatrick.
Zoom.
Mike Gay.
In person.
George Hertz.
In person.
Peter Ittig.
Here on Zoom.
Thank you, Peter. Caitlin? I know she's here. Caitlin? I'll come back to her. Tom Kilgariff?
Here in person.
George Laham?
Here on Zoom.
Thanks, George. Nadine? Christina?
Here on Zoom.
Thanks, Christina. Chris Pareda?
Here on Zoom.
Alex?
Here in person.
And I just need Caitlin?
Hi, here on Zoom.
Thanks, Caitlin. And I think we're good to go. Just a reminder, FinCom members, that this is a public hearing, so all members need to be on camera at all times, please. Just as a reminder. Thank you. Go ahead, George.
Okay, first let me grant permission to Westwood's media to live stream and videotape the meeting. Does anyone else wish to record this meeting? Okay, I don't see any of those. And then I'd like to welcome all remote in-person participants, including members, presenters, and members of the public and press. And let's start off by doing the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation,
under
God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so let me make a few introductory comments here. First of all, my name is George Hertz. I have been serving as vice chair this year, and the chair was not able to attend the meeting tonight due to a personal family emergency. And I want to extend our best wishes to her in dealing with that emergency as we handle this meeting. I know she very much wanted to be here, but I'm sure I will try and do a good job in filling in for her. This is a public meeting, and it's extremely important that we hear from not only members of FinCom, not only members from the school committees and the special building committee and town administrators, but from local citizens. This input is extremely important to us as we consider a very important vote we have to take tonight. Our proceedings tonight may appear a little bit cumbersome, but I want to go through them so we can try and add some understanding and meaning to our process. Questions have been submitted in writing by the FinCom to both the school committee and the special building committee, as well as to the town. And we have received written answers for those. But we want to go through those questions. And one of the things we will do tonight is the vice chair, Tom, will read the questions so that the public is aware of what those questions are. And then the folks from both the school and the town will be able to answer those questions. So we're trying to give the public a sense of some of the issues that the FinCom has raised and how we've addressed those. After we have gone through the public schools, we will ask FinCom members if they have any questions they want to ask of the article sponsors, which is basically the school committee or the special building committee. After that, Tom will go through the questions. We will read the questions that have been asked on the municipal side. And once again, I think the town folks will be available to answer those questions, so the public will have the benefit of some of the questions we have and listening to the answers. After that, once again, I will open it up and give FinCom members a chance to ask any questions they may have. Finally, we will allow for summary remarks by the presenters based on maybe some of the input you've seen tonight, some of the issues you want to emphasize both by the school committee folks and by the town administrators. And then finally, I will solicit, once again, overall comments from FinCom members. And then, last but not least, and probably even more important, we will open it up for questions and comments from the public and the press. And I want to emphasize, once again, how important it has been to me over the years to hear from the public. Input is extremely important to us as this committee makes its deliberation. So whether you're a new FinCom member, where you're a person watching us on Zoom in the public, please feel free to ask your questions. Every question is important for us to hear. So with that, let's start the process, and I will turn it over to, oh, by the way, at the end, I will probably, after public input, I will close the public hearings, we'll do a roll call vote, and FinCom members will go through deliberation. And for those of you who haven't seen it in the past, generally it's a very healthy discussion. I think every member of this FinCom committee, the Warrant Finance Commission, takes their role very seriously, and we end up with a very healthy debate. Once again, I think the FinCom reflects some of the concerns that exist within the community, which is one of the benefits of the Finance and Warrant Commission. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our person that's going to be doing a lot of reading. Do you have one more comment, Jane?
Just, George, can we remind members on Zoom to please stay on mute? If you want to make comments during this process, just raise your hand in the chat on Zoom, and we will get to you. But especially in the room, it will have feedback if people keep their mics on. So everybody, please try to stay on mute.
And I hope everybody knows how to use that little hand signal in chat, but it does make the process a lot easier, so we're trying to prevent people from overspeaking. One thing I will try and do as chair is try and balance the questions that come from FinCom, from those present to also those who are on Zoom, so people feel like they're getting an equal opportunity to state their views. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to our very experienced vice chair and ask him to start the reading of the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, first question. The school committee did not include the anticipated cost of Sheehan in their presentation. Please speak to what the anticipated cost is.
Sure, thank you. Before we start, I just wanted to introduce myself and our team who's here. I'm Maya Plotkin. I'm on the school committee and on the school building committee. And I'm Emily Park, superintendent of schools. And also on Zoom with us, we have Chin Lin with Compass Management, who's the owner's project manager. Tim Bonfatti, also with Compass. We have Don Walter and Rob Fitzgerald from Doran Whittier, which is the project architect for the project. So to address the Sheehan question, so back in December 2020, the design team estimated that the base repair cost for Sheehan, so this is just to bring the building up to code, would be about $27.1 million. And estimated that if we did a renovation or addition of Sheehan or a new construction, that those costs for those types of projects would range between $50 to $60 million. I did want to note that these estimates are about 9 months old at this point, and that they would need to be adjusted for inflation and for construction market conditions. So there is that caveat, but those are the numbers that we were looking at for Sheehan in December.
Great, thank you. Follow-up questions. Okay, question number 2. For the comparison schools, Hamlin versus Medfield, Westboro, Wellesley, Ashland, what is the total cost of each of these schools? What is the design enrollment of each of these schools? What is the cost per student of each of these schools?
So I first just wanted to provide some context here that during the feasibility study, when we were making comparisons among the various project options that we were considering in Westwood, we did use this cost per student metric. We did find that that was helpful for looking at the relative cost of each of the options on the table for Westwood, each of which had been designed to the specifications of our education program and our program needs. We did not find the cost per student metric to be particularly apt or helpful when making comparisons to other communities, and that's because different districts have different program needs and different space needs. I think one example would be that throughout this project of community engagement in Westwood, we really have heard loud and clear from the community that there's the need for additional gym space. And so for that reason, we have planned for a larger gym. We've heard about the need for field space, so we've provided for some field space. That may not be the case in other communities. And so those differences may skew the cost per student number. I think another example with that has to do with the educational program, that the Hamlin Deerfields project incorporates things that are important to us. That in Westwood, we have a significant commitment to special education and making sure that we have strong in-district programs so that our students are educated in their communities. We're very proud of the fact that it's a very small percentage of our kids who are not educated in district. That isn't necessarily the case in some other communities. So again, that changes the analysis. So for that reason, we used cost per square foot when comparing projects in different communities. We think that's a more apples to apples comparison. So with that long caveat, though, we did provide for you in our written responses the information that you were looking for. So the design enrollment for the comparison schools, we're at 560, and the communities that we're comparing ourselves to range from the smallest is 365 for Wellesley, 400 for Westboro, 575 for Medfield, and 635 for Ashland. So there is a range there. The cost per student, you can see varies. There's a really big variance. I think, again, because that cost per student metric is kind of a wonky one. So it ranges from a low in Ashland of about $133,000. For us, we're at about $156,000. And the highest in the range is Wellesley at $207,000. So those are the comparisons.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Okay. So question number 3, what is the cost of the geothermal energy facility?
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to clarify, we don't have a geothermal energy facility. What we're talking about are geothermal wells that need to go in for the HVAC system, the geothermal HVAC system. So I just wanted to clarify that. So the cost of the geothermal wells is approximately $3 million. But I did want to note 2 things. First, that this geothermal well cost doesn't take into account an alternate heating cooling system, which we would need. So in order to really understand the net cost of the geothermal, we would have to reduce that $3 million amount by whatever alternate system we would put in. And second, there's many elements of this project that are tied to this geothermal system. So if that were to change, then other costs would be accordingly adjusted. But I did want to clarify that at this point, the geothermal cost can't be taken out of the project and couldn't even be an alternate. The SBC has approved the submission of the design development with this geothermal system and has submitted it to the MSBA. The MSBA has approved the project with this geothermal system, so any changes would jeopardize the MSBA grant. In addition, we just want to point out that this is the direction that we understand from the community that this community wants to go in. I want to highlight that Governor Baker recently signed into a law an initiative that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuels to make buildings free or net zero emissions by 2050. This system is fossil fuel free. In addition, the system's been endorsed by Tom Philbin, who is the town's energy manager, and also aligns with the goals established by WEAC, which is the Westwood Environmental Action Committee, which is set forth in the Sustainability and Resiliency Comprehensive Plan update. So again, this system really does align with the goals of the town, the goals of the state, and I just want to tout our own horn here a little bit. After reviewing our system, the MSBA has actually asked the Westwood team to present to the MSBA on basically how to complete a net zero ready project in a very efficient manner. So I feel like that was a good thumbs up from the MSBA that we're doing something right.
Great, thank you. Next question. What is the cost of the mitigation facility for the radioactive gas problem on the Hamlin site, Radon?
So short answer, the cost is approximately $185,000.
Great, thank you. Next question. Will the school be equipped to host public meetings similar to the library, police station, Carvey Street, high school, and new community center? If so, will the equipment, cameras, microphones, AV control panel, et cetera, be purchased as part of the project? If yes, will Melinda Garfield, WMC Executive Director, be consulted to confirm the necessary equipment specs?
So the school will definitely be equipped to host public meetings. And the budget, the project budget, the baseline budget, does have a line item included in the overall project cost for technology and equipment for that type of meeting. And we would love to partner with Westwood Media Center. We have always partnered with them. They're a wonderful community partner. As we know, sitting here, they have provided all the technology for this room. So we absolutely would bring Westwood Media Center into those discussions to make sure that these rooms will be equipped with whatever they need on their end to be able to host meetings like this for the public.
Great, thank you. Next question. Will there be any outdoor lighting for any of the sports fields or playgrounds? Will there be an outdoor scoreboard included in the project? Will there be any seating for spectators near the sports fields?
So there is no outdoor lighting that's planned for the sports fields or the playgrounds, and there is no outdoor scoreboard included in the project. There is one small set of bleachers that's included by the Little League baseball field. And then in addition to that, the way the site is, the west side of the soccer field, the multi-sport field, will have this naturally raised grassy berm where basically people could come and, put their own chairs out if they wanted to have that vantage point to view a game.
Great, thank you. Okay, down the home stretch here. I have a follow-up question on the attached, let's see here, slide 25 project comparisons. Let's see, so this is just copy pasted, so I need to make some sense of this, don't I? Yes, it sounds like I'm rambling. Let's see.
That was from our previous September 8th meeting,
Yes.
presentation.
It's helpful to see comparisons by square footage. I would be interested in seeing price per student comparisons. I'm not familiar with the size of the other schools, so not sure if they have comparable number of students. Apologies if this was already provided, but didn't see it at first glance. So that was question number 2.
That was question number 2 that we just talked
So I
about. Yeah.
skipped right over that. Okay, great. All right, moving along. During Westwood's discussion leading up to the feasibility study vote in 2018, we talked about the experience another community, the town of Lincoln, had with a failed town meeting vote for an MSBA project and their subsequent efforts to get re-invited into the program. Do you know whether or not they ever got back into the program, whether or not they moved forward with the project, and if so, what the cost of it was?
Yeah. So when I got that question, I did look into that and speak to someone in Lincoln. So basically, in the fall of 2012, Lincoln was where we currently are in our process. So they had a couple years before been invited into the MSBA program for the Lincoln School, and they had completed their feasibility study, schematic design, and design development for that project. It's a K-8 school. Their plan at the time was to build a new school. And with the MSBA's participation, the project cost to residents at the time would have been about $23 million. The vote failed at a fall town meeting in 2012. Lincoln then reapplied to the MSBA program for the project 3 more times. They applied in 2013, 2015, and 2016, and they were not accepted into the MSBA program on any of those tries. And so at that point, the community decided, sort of seeing the writing on the wall, that they would need to begin a new feasibility study for a project that would be fully funded by the town without the state's participation. That project is, they've moved in half of their students this fall, and it's a phased project. They're moving in the other half next fall, so it will be complete in fall 2022, 10 years after the failed vote. It's a 109,000 square foot building, whereas the original project was for new construction. This project is a 75% reno, 25% addition. for 660 students, and the project cost to residents there is now approximately $93 million.
Wow. Could I ask a quick follow-up to that, Emily? So the cost numbers are pretty dramatic, where it's the town would have paid 23 million 10 years ago, and now it's 93 million. But how does the two projects compare from an apples-to-apples comparison?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the project is fairly different. So it was going to be new construction, and instead they decided to go with this renovation and addition. They did have to be able to accommodate the increased number of students, so they couldn't just renovate. But the design enrollment is the same, is my understanding. So they knew how big the building needed to be, and so I think they are comparable in that sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those responses. So at this point, what I'd like to do is see if FinCom members, both on Zoom and or in the room here, have any additional questions for the school building committee. And in the chat, raise your hand, please. Put your little hand up if you have any questions.
So Peter Iddig?
Yes, thank you. I do have some additional questions. I would like to mention that the sound quality for those on Zoom is very poor, especially for George Hertz. George, if you're able to get closer to the microphone, that would be good. But I do have an additional question. I did notice that also we have a question from someone who asked about whether they're able to see the written replies. I don't know if that's possible or not, but there is such a question. But the table provided that I'm able to see shows that the total cost is significantly higher for the Hamlin than for all four of the comparison schools, including those designed for larger numbers of students in Medfield and Ashland. About $10 million higher in the case of the Medfield school in particular. And my question is, can you summarize the reasons for that $10 million difference regarding the school in Medfield, which was designed for a larger number of students? Thank you.
So I'm not as familiar with the Medfield, with actually enough of these projects to discuss that in detail. I'm going to ask if Chin, Tim, or Rob, or Don could answer that question.
I can try. I'm Tim Bonfatti. I'm from Compass, and I'm actually a resident of Medfield. So, I'm not as engaged that I know all the answers to that question, Peter. But I do know that Medfield's program is different than Westwood's, in the sense, and we do not have the same for some of the stuff that Superintendent Parks had mentioned. I think that accounts for most of it, because on $1 per square foot, unfortunately, we're paying, I think, a pretty significantly larger
When you
price
say
for our
we, you
school.
mean Medfield, right, Tim?
Pardon?
When you say we're paying a larger amount, you mean?
I mean Medfield, yeah.
All right.
We as the taxpayers of, as I sit here in Medfield, we as the taxpayers of Medfield, yes. So, but it pretty much relates to the same point that Superintendent Parks made. It's a different program. We don't have the fields that are being built, for instance, as part of that. So there's, every project is different in terms of, program and size and square footage.
Let me just ask, how's the sound quality now when I'm talking? Guess no complaints. Are there any questions within the room before?
George Laham is still, he would
Okay,
like to
George.
make a comment. Go ahead,
Hi,
George.
I understand people are looking at the cost per square foot, and I'm looking at the schedule that's on that was on the email that was sent out, and I really think it's deceiving, because the cost per square foot as compared to Medfield and Ashland, it has the value at $87 million. That's not the price. That's the total, that is the total price, but that's not what it's costing Westwood. Westwood's getting, I believe, Emily or Maya, you can correct me, I believe we're getting 20 million, give or take, from the MSBA.
18.2.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 18.2. So, I think that graph is very misleading, because if you knock $18.2 million off of it, it's not 150, it's, not 156 or whatever it is per student. I mean, I think that's a deceiving thing, and I don't think it was done to, I think it's going to give people the wrong impression. And my second point, and I know we're all trying to, not offend anybody and be politically correct, but I think we're skirting an issue by not speaking plain to it. You gave examples of, I think, the town that tried 3 different times after it got denied, after it went to a vote and the town said no. What town was that?
Yep, Lincoln.
Lincoln. So you're essentially, how I interpret what you said is, if I was a betting man, I would say, if we don't vote this now and accept it, we're probably not going to get a chance at that $18.7 million again. So it's not going to be able to, we're not going to be able to get it for the Sheehan. If I was a betting man, that is a good assumption to make. Would you agree, Emily?
I mean, I would agree, George, if I were going to place bets, that right now we have an opportunity. It's a real opportunity. It's a signed agreement for a reimbursement of up to $18.2 million for this project, right, for the design that we have submitted to the MSBA. So that's what's on the table. The question of whether or not we would be invited into the MSBA program again in the future, I mean, we can look to what happened in Lincoln as a potential indication. I can tell you that in my conversations with MSBA, when we had not yet been accepted, but we were sort of shortlisted in the process, I got a phone call very specifically asking me, is there community will in Westwood to support the schools and to get a project like this through? And my assessment was yes, so I answered honestly that I thought that there was. I think that the MSBA doesn't want to spend, you can see this process has been a multi-year process with them to get us to this point. They are not interested in investing the time and resources it takes to work with the community, if they think that there isn't the will in the community to go forward. So that's
they don't want to waste their time, and I understand that and appreciate that. I guess the better question, I've done it one side. Have you ever heard of a town voting something down and then getting the MSBA to give them a second shot and give them on another project in a very confined 2 to 3 year time period?
Well, I'm racking my brain right now. I can't think of an example, but I will say our design team, in fairness, may be more immersed in that world than I am and may have an example. I wonder,
Does anyone
Tim,
from
do you know?
Compass or Doran Whittier, have you heard of that?
There is a case, but it's not 1 or 2 years. It's more like 4 or 5 years. Lynn, their middle school, they have three middle schools, and then they were only able to get one of them through, and then that they were not able to get the other ones, and so they went back and then waited 4 or 5 years before that they got invited back again for the middle school.
And during that 4 to 5 year period, Westwood will still have to spend $40 million, 41 point something million dollars to bring the Downey, not the Downey, the Pine Hill and the Deerfield up to code.
If we perform significant renovations to those schools, that would trigger that requirement, yes. And we would, but regardless, we would still have to maintain those buildings. We know, for example, that Hamlin needs a new roof. We've been holding off on that because of this project, but we would certainly move forward with a new roof for Hamlin, which is in the millions of dollars. And, we would have to, in the next 5 years, we would have additional costs for capital upkeep, even if we don't trigger that code, which we very well may.
And my last comment is something, thanking Maya and Emily for attending a PTO presentation. One of the comments that I would say that came out of it was a question, and I'm not sure anybody can answer this, but I'd like to put it out there. So we do this project, the town approves it. We have a building at the Deerfield. Is there any way, and I caution the way I say this, but is there any way to sell the building, rent it out, or generate revenue on the Deerfield, which we can no longer use, to and then essentially subsidize this project? So instead of going from the 87 million down to the 69 million after the MSBA, it would be able to be subsidized even further because of a selling the land, renting it out, leasing it out, a way to defray the cost.
So I don't think that at this point there would be. So the process would be that the Deerfield School is under the control of the school department. If it's no longer something that the school department has an educational use for, it would be turned back over to the town. At that point, there would have to be a process on the town side. I would also say that I think that the MSBA would want to see that process happen. In other words, they're not interested in communities sort of selling off assets and then also taking the investment from the MSBA to
Just a
their
question, I mean,
properties.
I'm not trying to be a real estate mogul here, I'm just asking a question about getting a number down,
Yeah.
because the only objection I have heard is, do we really need the project and all the bells and whistles, can we get the price down? And it seems like that's the only thing, everybody agrees with it, so that's the only reason why I was bringing up the Deerfield.
So the Deerfield could be used for town use, right? And that would alleviate, I think, pressures on other departments, and even potentially the need to renovate certain areas of certain buildings. So it could certainly defray costs in that manner. I can't speak to that, that would be sort of a select board issue.
I understand.
But
All right, look, George, at this point, I want to do something here. I want to make sure that, do any of the FinCom members have any other questions? If you don't have questions, I want to open it up for your individual comments. I want to give the folks on Zoom and the folks in the room here a chance to just comments, observations. You don't have to say anything, but do you have any observations you want to share? So let me do one more thing. Are there any direct questions that people want to ask of the folks here from the school building committee before I open it up for comments?
I have one question, George.
Go.
If I could. I just wanted to double check on the heels of George's question regarding Lincoln and the MSBA program. In 2018, were there not 82 applicants for the program, for the MSBA program, and Westwood was one of 15 towns accepted?
Yes,
Those numbers are
that
correct?
seems correct, yes.
Those are my notes anyway.
Okay, well
So-
then, I'm sure you're right.
So, okay. I just
Yes.
want to.
Certainly, it was
So-
80-something, so 82 and about
15
15.
towns out of 82 applicants that were accepted.
That's right.
Great, thank you.
All right, let's start asking, are there any, we'll start at the end of the room here with Alex, our new member. Do you have any comments you want to make, Alex? You don't have to, but we're more than willing to listen to any comments or suggestions you have.
Yeah, I don't know the nature of the comments typically made in this portion, but I think for me, the school, generally, the plan makes sense. I think what concerns me more is the Sheehan opportunity that's going to come up in a short period of time with all the parameters and concerns around MSBA funding in a short period of time for our town. So I think that's sort of complementary to this conversation, not I have no objections. I think this presentation was thorough and the answers were great. I think that's what concerns me most in terms of the town's opinion of when we're back here in say 2 years discussing a similar nature with a potentially much higher price tag because of the MSBA's lack of involvement, most likely.
Thank you. Do we want to see if anybody I'm trying to go back and forth, Jane, so I'll just open it up. Does anybody either on Zoom raise your hand or within the room here want to make a comment? Jim, starting to you.
Can we just remind people who are listening in, we're going to take comments from public
Public
and
at the
press
end.
at the end after the municipal side answers questions. So we see you and we're going to get to you, but we have a process.
Thank you,
Sorry to
Jane.
interrupt.
Do you have any
Yeah,
comments?
most everything's been said, and I would just reiterate, when the project started, we were looking at a 33 to 36% reimbursement rate, and we're down to an 18% reimbursement rate. So a lot of the feedback I get is there are a lot of, it's a great project. I think the schools need it. I think most people agree with that, but they think there are too many niceties into it, which I think it should go to a vote for the town, but I think the dollar signs are scaring a lot of people away.
I do just want to clarify that, so the base reimbursement rate is in fact 39%, is that correct? And the net reimbursement with the caps and exclusions that we've discussed here in some detail is, it's higher than 18, it's 21.
21.1%, I believe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's, from what we understand from Compass and from Dorn Whittier, that is typical for a community like Westwood to receive a net reimbursement rate in that 20 to 22% range.
On that note, just an aside, you mentioned how the governor, everyone's pushing for green deals. Have they put their money where their mouth is? How much of the geothermal part of it is being reimbursed?
I think, Chin, do you know, can you tell us the reimbursement on the geothermal?
On that particular item, it's basic, the geothermal system is being incorporated into the overall building. And so it's not broken out in any special way. So it's overall reimbursement. There's no special, there's no special item for that, but the project does have 2 additional incentive percentage that which makes up that 39.35 number, or the base reimbursement rate for eligible costs.
So basically,
So-
the 39%, that reflects an additional 2 percentage points, otherwise it would have been 37, because we meet certain sustainability goals set by the MSBA. But the geothermal system itself is subject to reimbursement by the MSBA as part of the overall project.
Okay, but we don't know how it breaks out.
I don't think that they break it out that way.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't think they do that. But it will certainly save us money going forward in operating costs. We know that. Because it's, as you know, it's a fossil fuel-free system. So I believe, and I can't speak to that, maybe Chin, you can talk a little bit, or Tim can talk a little bit about, we did look at the savings we'll get from the geothermal system. I don't know if you want that information.
Yeah, break it, I'm good.
Okay, all right, thanks, Chin.
Any other comments that FinCom members want to make? Observations? Yes.
George, quick question. There's some additional questions that we submitted. Are we going to go over those still?
Yes, those are going to go. What we're going to do is that question will be our reader, who's going to get the summer reading award, will read that question, okay? And then Pam will make a presentation. She will
Pam is
take us
here.
through a couple of slides, okay? But I just want to finish this. Anybody on Zoom have any comments or observations they want to
I don't
make?
see anybody in the chat, George. Nobody's raising
Nobody
their
in the chat?
hands. We have a member of the public in the chat. We'll hold off on that for right now.
Okay, all right, so let's now shift over to that question number 9 on our notes here.
Okay, number 9. FinCom understands there are 2 additional capital projects in the next few years, Sheehan and the fire station. The school has provided us with an estimate cost for Sheehan and their proposed timeline. What is the estimate cost of the fire station, and what does the town see as the timeline for each of these projects?
And we're, just to interrupt, we're welcoming Pam Dukeman and Chris Coleman at this point, and they're on with us on Zoom.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Coleman. I'm the town administrator. Thank you for having me. In regards to this question, the town is in the process of putting together what we call requests for proposals, or RFPs, to conduct a feasibility study on the fire station headquarters. Within this study, we're looking at a variety of things as far as locations, cost, whether it's going to be renovation, a rebuild, or renovation, and a new addition. That's what the feasibility study we're looking to get from the feasibility study. We have in the 5-year capital plan, we have the numbers of 1.25 million for design and 15 million for construction. Given what we've seen in the construction field over the last 3 months, I would anticipate that that project would be at least that amount of money, but I cannot say for sure what that cost would be until we get some information back from our consultants.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, any questions from FinCom members to Chris Coleman? I don't see any questions. Any comments people want to make on that issue? Okay. And once again, the public will have their chance to comment on this, as well as the school building committee and presentation. So at this point in time, I think what we want to do is ask Ms. Dukeman, who's going to make a brief presentation for us. Pam, turn it over to you.
I think Tom is going to read the question
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
Pam is going to answer it. That's
Okay.
it, George, no worries. And Pam, do you want to, you can share your screen anytime, or would you like to wait till after, or?
Yes, if I can share, that'd be great.
That would be, go right ahead.
And Pam, should I ask each question individually, or should I rattle through all five and then turn it over to you?
I think if you go individually, that'd be great.
Okay, you got it. Please show longer history of exempt debt history of total net exempt debt outside Prop 2.5.
Okay, great. And I just want to mention before I start that these are some follow-up questions to your last meeting. At your last meeting on September 8th, we went through kind of the funding of this project in great detail. We also looked at the town's debt in general, went through what do we have outstanding debt, how does our debt work, how debt is changing over the next couple of years. We talked about exempt debt, talked about the high school project, that debt ending. So all of that is in a separate presentation, and that is up on our website if there's anyone who didn't get to see that meeting. But looking now at this particular question, you asked, we showed this slide at the last meeting. This is our exempt debt currently for the debt outside Prop 2.5. So exempt debt means if a project is approved as a debt exemption, the exact amount of the principal and interest each year can be raised outside the limits of Proposition 2.5. The town currently has just two projects that are exempt debt. The high school bond, and we're making our last payment on that next year, FY23, and the library bond. We're about halfway through the library project. We have 9 payments remaining. So we looked at this last year with FY22, your last meeting, FY22 in green, that we currently pay about a net of $1 million a year in exempt debt. So the question came, can we look at a longer history of that? And that's what this slide is on the bottom. And that really was a great question, and I think it was Bill who asked that question. Because you get a really interesting picture when you look back. The town has had, in the past, other exempt debt projects, which we've completed the repayment for that debt, and they are currently dropped off. If we look at this slide going back to the late 90s, we had exempt debt of about $500,000 in 98, just under $1 million in FY99, FY2000. So those were some projects to do some work at the middle school. We had a road project, I think a purchase of land. Our exempt debt climbed in FY 2003 when the Martha Jones and Downey projects came online. And then it went up significantly FY 04, up to $6.2 million when the high school bond came online. So 6 times kind of where we are now is what we had in the past for exempt debt. We talked about the MSBA project, the program for the Martha Jones and the high school worked much differently than it did today. We had to issue the bond in total, and then the MSBA gives us an annual amount to put towards that cost. That's quite different now. This new program, the MSBA pays their share of the project as the project progresses. So the MSBA program, our Martha Jones and Downey and high school were kind of the last ones in under that old program. The MSBA program back then was struggling. We actually had to issue the debt in full before we got any reimbursement from MSBA. So we were at a peak of 6.2 million. The MSBA the next year started paying their share from Martha Jones and Downey. We dropped down, and then we dropped way down when they started paying their share of the high school. In FY12, the other project that I mentioned, the library. Our new library was a $13 million project, $4 million paid by a state grant from the library board commissioners, $9 million for the town. That debt came online here in FY12. And then we've had a steady decline of about $100,000 a year as that debt is paid off until we get now till FY22 again in the green. The high school project, as I mentioned, ends next year. And then you see this drop down in FY24. We would be back down to 530,000 in exempt debt. At that point, that would be just the library. So I just want to point out again that over the last 20 years, a 20-year period, there's only been 2 projects proposed as exempt debt, the high school and the library. That means every other project, capital project that's been done in town has been within Prop 2.5. So middle school modulars, any capital work done for any of the schools, any police and fire equipment or vehicles or DPW vehicles, any road work, all of the road work this summer, the easements and crosswalks, the new police station, the new fire station has all been done within Proposition 2.5. So again, that's the longer term look at exempt debt. Clearly shows when a project ends, the debt ends. Again, we've had this gradual decline over the last 10-year period because of the way the debt is structured. About 100,000 a year less each year we collect for people. The next drop off is the high school in fiscal 23. Okay, for the next question, or?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right, next question. What would the impact be on the cost of borrowing if the town had a lower bond rating?
So we just took a quick look at this. So we currently have a AAA bond rating from Standard & Poor's, the highest rating available. We most recently sold the bond in March 2021. So in the spring, we sold a $7.7 million bond, and we went through that at a previous meeting with the FinCom. That was for some new projects, including the Wentworth Hall facility. We also refinanced the middle school modulars and the library. We were able to refinance and save $750,000 on the library project. The net interest rate we received for that sale was 1.14% interest. We just had our bond advisor give us a quick look that if we had a AA rating at that time, that interest rate would have been, and we sold again back in March, about 15 basis points higher, meaning our interest rate would have been 1.3%. The additional cost would have been approximately $75,000. So a savings from having the lower rate at that time, not a significant savings at that point, only because the interest rate is so low to begin with. Again, that $7.7 million bond had some components that were 20-year components.
Great, thank you. Next question, for the proposed 30-year bonds, what is the current expected difference in interest rates for 30-year bonds versus 20-year bonds as were used for the high school? And B, what is the approximate total cost of this difference over the 30-year term?
Okay, so we laid out in a chart for a 20-year bond, the same as what you had been looking at previously for the 30 years. We're looking at 3 potential interest rates for a 20-year bond, 1.5%, 2%, and 2.5%. We've laid out the chart showing the total cost of the bond at each of those rates, and then showing the cost per 100,000 of home value and the cost to the average home. So this chart is laid out in the exact same way. And then on the next page, we're showing you the comparison. So this is the chart we've been using for the 30-year bond, the 2, 3, and 4% interest rates, the annual principal and interest payment we would make at the 2% rate, $55 per 100,000 of home value, $462 for a house valued at about $837,000. The 20-year bond we're showing at the bottom at the lowest interest rate of 1.5%. The annual cost per 100,000 of home value, $72. The impact for that average home, $837,000, would be $602 a year. So that's the comparison. I will point out the high school was funded for 20 years. That was the maximum we were allowed to borrow at that time. The state laws did change subsequently, and they do let us now borrow for a 30-year period. We did borrow for the police station bond. It is a 30-year bond. So this shows you the cost comparison from the 20-year to the 30-year. And we talked at one of your prior meetings about the 30-year certainly is closer to the expected life of the school, which would be, in excess of 50 years. It's also a more equitable way to spread that among today's residents and those who will be moving into the town, over the next 15, 20, 25 years, who will receive the benefit of the new school project, as well as today's residents. So it's a way to not put all the burden on residents who are here today, but to spread that amongst future residents also.
Great, thank you. Next question. As mentioned last night during Pam's presentation, which was a couple weeks ago, the average homeowner's tax burden for this project will be $462 based on an $837,000 property at 2% interest. This assumes the full $69.5 million project cost. It would be helpful for Pam to show the $41 million project costs for our option B, bringing Deerfield and Hamlin up to code. My quick math is that the average homeowner's tax burden for option B would be $272, assuming the same interest rate and 30-year term of debt we would need to issue. I think the delta of $190 is a more accurate view of the choice to build the new school versus Band-Aid the current buildings. Could Pam validate those numbers and possibly add it to her presentation?
Okay, so we did the same chart. This would be for the $41.7 million project, just to bring Hamlin and Deerfield up to code, no MSBA reimbursement. So again, we're showing a 30-year bond, the 2, 3, and 4% interest rates, and we're calculating that average, the annual payment, the cost per 100,000 of home value, and the cost of that average home at $837,000. So this slide shows just for the 41 million, and then the next slide we're showing you that comparison. So here's the full new school, the 87.8 with the MSBA reimbursement at the 2% interest rate. Again, $55 per 100,000 of home value, annual cost to an $837 home, $462. And then for the repairs only, the 2%, that cost is $277 a year for that same home. So whoever asked the question and said they thought it was about $190 a year difference, you get the gold star. You were right on target. So the increase in cost is $185 for the average home to go from bringing the buildings up to code only versus what would be for the new building. $277 a year for the maintenance only, $462 a year for the new building, a difference of $185 a year for that average home.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Pam. And final prepared question. The homeowner tax increase is based on their current home valuation. As home valuations increase, will their respective tax burden also increase? Or will their costs remain constant regardless of their home valuation changes during their 30-year term of the bond? If the homeowner's tax burden tied to this project will fluctuate, it's likely that the town will collect more than the $69.5 million necessary to fund the project. What will happen to those excess funds?
Okay, thank you for the question, because I want to point out something that a lot of people miss. But first of all, there's no excess funds. That's not how it works. So we will not collect more than what's approved for the project. So just to go through this, change in value does not mean more taxes are collected for the town. Town meeting approves budget, our annual operating budget, capital budgets, whatever is approved at town meeting, they approve the borrowing articles. The amount we are going to collect is set by town meeting. The values are how that's distributed amongst the residents in town. So home value never impacts the total dollar amount that gets approved. So just to look at that. So town meeting approves a budget. That's all we can collect, whether it's for our annual budget, whether it's for the annual amount for debt payments. Each year, we have to set the values for the home in town. We're required by state law, the Department of Revenue, to annually reassess homes. They're based on sales activity that occurs in town. Amounts of our values are certified by DOR each year. So town meeting's approving the total collected. We then get the value set, and the town meeting divided by the value gives us our tax rate. And an individual's home tax bill is based on the tax rate times your actual home value. So I mentioned I was glad this question was asked, because I think people see sometimes when values are accelerating, as they're certainly doing in town right now. Homes are selling, for much higher than their assessed values. People are seeing values continuing to accelerate. That does not bring the town any more tax dollars. Value does not give us more taxes. It just distributes it. So if home values, say, doubled in a year, the tax rate would just go down. We do not collect any more money than what's approved at town meeting. So I think that's important to know, particularly when we're in this period of values going up and people see large home prices. That does not bring the town any more money in taxes.
Thanks, Pam.
I was just going to talk about the warrant article and the.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Jane.
You're
I
welcome.
just wanted to mention quickly the article itself. So when a town is authorized to borrow money, you are committing, future town meetings to pay that debt. So because of that, it's a very legal transaction. And that's why it requires 2/3 vote at town meeting, because you're committing future town meetings to repay that debt. So with any borrowing article, and the language of the town meeting article is what we have to take when we go to actually sell the bond. So it's a very legal process. Any of our language at town meeting is written by bond counsel to make sure that it's factually right, that it shows that we have the authority to do this borrowing, because communities are only allowed to borrow for certain things. We can't borrow for operating budgets, for example, and that the article is written is going to make it through the selling of the bond process. So the article is written by bond counsel. It has to be approved by 2/3 at town meeting. Your motion, what your vote is, your recommendation, the motion on town meeting floor is this, and it's also written by bond counsel. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things. It's a very, again, legal, a very legal vote. It's a very legal presentation of what's happening. I've underlined a couple of things and just pointed out down here. So what the article does is it authorizes the town treasurer and the select board to issue the debt. It authorizes a borrowing up to amount. The article recognizes that there will be MSBA reimbursement for the project. And the article here also states that this vote can only go forward and the borrowing only occur if this article is also voted on a town election as a debt exemption, if it's authorized to be borrowed outside the limits from Proposition 2.5. So all of those things are occurring in this language. Ability to issue debt, the upper limit of the project, that we have to apply all the MSBA reimbursement into the borrowing and only borrow the net amount, and that the project requires a second vote at the town election as a debt exemption. And then finally, we just have here, this is the ballot question that would be asking for the debt exemption. Again, bond counsel writes these questions, and the language of this and the article itself has been reviewed by MSBA, by our town council, written by bond counsel, and it basically just says, shall the town be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Prop 2.5 the amounts to pay for the bond issued for the new school? And again, we talked before, a debt exemption approval means that for the life of this bond, the exact principal and interest each year, net of any reimbursement, can be raised outside that calculation of Proposition 2.5. When the debt ends, the taxes end. So we've been asked about that. We have pointed out that the high school, that 20-year bond for the high school ends next year. We have one payment remaining. We are not allowed to continue to raise that money in taxes. That taxing authority ends when the borrowing ends. And each year, as part of our tax rate submission and approval process with Department of Revenue, the town treasurer has to certify what is the annual principal and interest each year for a bond. So that's something that's regulated, and we only raise the exact amount needed for the debt.
Pam, thank you for, as usual, a very, very thorough presentation of some very complex issues. So at this point, let me open it up to FinCom members do you have any questions for either Mr. Coleman or Ms. Dukeman at this point in time on their material?
Yeah.
Jim?
Yes. Pam, when do you expect the debt, the bond to be sold?
Sorry, is my screen there? Okay, sorry. It would not be sold probably next summer.
Okay, so
If the project were to be approved, the treasurer would meet with the school building committee, look at their timeline. I believe construction on the school is to start next summer, that there still would be additional design work and planning work to be done. So that would occur. Sometimes the treasurer will issue first just a short-term note for any cash needed in the interim. Again, as I mentioned, MSBA will pay their share on a monthly basis as you go, as the bills are submitted, which they're doing now for the other two phases, the feasibility and the bridge funding from the Springtown meeting. So I would anticipate that it would not be, the earliest would be next summer that we'd be looking at issuing perhaps the whole bond or kind of a major piece of the bond.
Okay, so the town's going to have another assessment in January of 2022. Do you have a sense of what the average home value will be? And as a betting man, since we're all betting tonight, I'm betting that the taxes or the assessments are going to go up in 2022. So do you have a sense what the average home value would be in January of 2022?
No, I don't have that. But again, that's not going to kind of change. Say all home values went up 10%. You'd be looking at the same numbers.
You'd be looking at the same cost, but the average home value is going to change. So individual.
No, if everyone's value goes up, if our total value goes up, you'd be, there might be a different number than that 837, but the cost per home would not change.
Well, the cost per home won't change, but if the homeowner's value changes, their individual number will change, right? If your home goes from 800,000 to 900,000, your number is going to change.
Not if all the home values go up, which they will.
Okay.
George, I have a quick follow-up. Pam, I appreciate all the numbers. Just so I'm clear, again, from a math perspective, so if we're oversimplifying and it's $185 difference between getting the schools up to code versus the new build, is my math right in that the average homeowner in Westwood would have to pay, 50 cents per day? So 50 cents per day approximately?
Yes.
Okay.
More, yes, the delta, the increase, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Pareda has his hand up. You ready, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Just a couple of observations. Pam, of course, is correct that our annual tax levy limit is not based on the assessments. It's based on the previous year limit, increased 2.5% maximum, and then added to that any authorized exemptions, debt exemptions that we authorize at town meeting. So she is correct that if as a result of the surge in the real estate market that we're experiencing, everyone's values go up, well, the tax rate is going to go down, so that the effect of this borrowing is probably going to wash out. I think that's what I got from her. But a question to Pam. The town meeting language speaks in terms of $84.6 million borrowing, where the total project cost is 87.8. So can you explain that, Delta?
It lists the three pieces. So the town meeting language here says the 84 million, and then further in it says that would be added to the 1.75 feasibility study, which was approved in 2018, and the 1460 design that was approved at the May 2021 town meeting for a total cost.
It got buried in
Yes.
the unbolded language.
Yes, okay, sorry about that, yes. So this is the piece being asked for now, is the 84.6, but then it clarifies there's been two other pieces already voted by town meeting, and that the total project is $87.8 billion.
Do I understand correctly that those two other pieces have not actually issued yet?
They've not been issued long-term. We
Okay,
have a
okay.
short-term, one-year note.
So they will be rolled into the 30-year note if this passes.
Yes, and when we showed you the 30-year cost, we're using that total, 87.8. Yes, so there's not additional borrowing. Those pieces would all be included in the one total project in one bond. Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments? I think that's, at this point, if we have no more comments, I'd like to give Emily Parks and Maya Plotkin a chance to maybe, make some summary comments or final observations on your part.
George, can I interrupt before we start? Just for, I see some questions from residents in the Q&A. I'd like to just please remind you we need your first and last name and address in order to read your question. So if you could kindly add that while you're waiting, that would be appreciated. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine.
Thank you.
Great, all right, well, thank you. So, so I'll state the obvious, I'm the superintendent of schools, so I'm highly interested in the outcome of this. And I will say that, as I speak to residents over the years, the number one thing that people say to me when we talk about schools is, I moved here because of the schools, right? The schools are what bring people to Westwood. And, I just want to say that I am keenly aware of that, right? And the responsibility that I have as the superintendent. I think that the school that we've designed here is one that I am very excited about, happy with the design. I think what it does is it brings to life really the education plan that we set forth. We said, this is what we need to do the kind of education programming that we want to do in Westwood. I think it's a wonderful building. I don't think it's some kind of over-the-top building. I think it is a school that very much reflects the kinds of elementary schools that districts are building today. It reflects the moment that we're in, and it will be built with the future in mind. I've been talking to people in the community about this for a long time, starting back in 2017 when I first went out to say to people, we need to do this feasibility study, here's the condition of our buildings. And I would say that here we are several years later, and I also feel like we've done a good job with this design, listening to the input of the community. So 75 public meetings, right, 13 of which were community forums. And I think that this really is not just a school that reflects our educational needs, but it's a school for the community. We listened to what people in Westwood said they need: field space, gym, performance space, in a building that's integrated with the outdoors. It will be the summer headquarters for the district, is where we will run our summer enrichment programs for kids across the district. It's where we'll run our ESY programs for students across the district. It will provide space for rec. And so I think that that's really important. It's important for the community. We have a need and we have an opportunity right now. And I think that this really is the best way forward for us when we look at that need and the opportunity. If If for some reason this project didn't go forward, we've talked a lot about sort of what would be the alternative. And, you know, the base repair would be the alternative. And I need to point out that base repair, while it would bring some things into code and maybe fix some systems, what it doesn't do is change the footprint of the building. It still leaves us with undersized classrooms. It still leaves us with professionals who are working in offices that used to be closets. It still leaves an art classroom and a music classroom that's the backstage that we've just kind of jerry-rigged, right? So it doesn't change those things. It doesn't address those very real needs. What it also doesn't do is address what we think are the very real benefits of consolidation. That we right now have these 2 elementary schools in Westwood, Hamlin, and Deerfield that have fewer than 200 students. I can only tell you that if you do a comparison of surrounding communities, those are very, very small schools. They are not operationally efficient, and they create some educational problems where we have such small numbers at any given grade that we either end up with 1 very large class or 2 tiny little classes. It doesn't make sense, and it's a challenge every year in the operating budget, right? So I just want to be clear that base repair is just that. It's a base repair. It doesn't help us to meet these forward-thinking goals that we have as a district. And so that is an important part to me educationally. And I think it's about where we invest our money and what we want to get as a return on that investment.
Thank you for your comments. Maya?
Thank you. I just want to speak a little bit further. Emily talked about the education. I want to talk a little about the cost. I grew up in Westwood. I went through the Westwood Public Schools, and my kids are in the Westwood Public Schools. And I moved back here because of the schools, because as most of us did. And when we decided to move forward with this project, when the school committee got involved, when the SBC was formed, one of the things we were very, very conscious of is the cost. We did not want to build a Taj Mahal. We did not want to build, you know, a top-of-the-line car. We wanted to build a functional educational school that could deliver the education that I received and that I want my children to receive and that I want the future children of Westwood to receive. I think we did that. And yes, there are walls of windows, but it turns out that that costs the same as, or substantially the same as putting up a cement wall. And what we did, every single decision we made was very, very thoughtful about cost. We take our fiscal responsibilities to this town very seriously, and I think that was reflected in every single one of those 75 public meetings. I wanted to emphasize that the cost of this project is in line with other communities. The cost per square foot, which is really the right metric to look at, is lower than all of those other projects we showed you. And finally, this is a flat tax. The amount we pay in year 1, if you're paying $400 per year, which is about $40 a month, if you're paying that per year in year 1, you are paying $40 a year in year, $400 per year in year 26. That amount does not increase despite your house increasing in value. That's an important point, because that means that the value that you are giving to the town increases as your net effect decreases throughout this 30-year bond. I think that's a really important point. And at the end of the day, what we need to do, this is how towns invest in their communities. This is how we invest in our kids. This is how we invest in our students. I don't want future kids to go to the same school that I went to. And I really want this to be a symbol that Westwood does invest in its kids, it invests in its future, and it invests in its community. And that, at the end of the day, is what this is, a community project driven by the community and hopefully approved by the community.
Any?
Sorry, Charlie Dolan, I think.
Charlie, quick.
Still I could use.
Please, that would be great, Charlie.
First of all, I want to thank you people for all the time you put in what you're doing. It really makes a big difference to us to have somebody asking the questions and pushing it. We've had a tough year at the school committee. Number one, getting kids back to school safely, and it's a huge amount of time spent trying to do that. So I want to thank my fellow school committee members and the administration. The The 75 meetings have been out getting input from the public, but we've also, the school committee building committee has been meeting probably every 2 weeks with our great consultants. Duran, Whittier, and Compass have given us tremendous advice. We meet at 8 o'clock in the morning. We've had, all the school committee members have been there. We've had Pam Dukeman, our town administrator. We've had a select board member and other town administrators and about 6 administrators in the school. So we've been working very hard, dealing with every cost issue, what color bricks. It's unbelievable the amount of time put in. So we appreciate the time you're spending to look at this work. There's a couple of unique things.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just for the record, would you give us your name and address
I'm
also,
sorry,
please?
Charles
No,
Donahue.
excuse
I'm
me,
on the
please,
school committee, 407 Gay Street.
Thank you.
First of all, our school system is a little unique. This is news to me, for being on the school. 17% of our kids have special education needs, and we educate them in the town. We're educating kids with autism. In other towns, they can't be educated. It takes more time, more money. We're taking some programs from Downey to the new school to allow special ed to be taken out of Downey so we can put them into the new school. So that's something unique, why maybe our costs are a little higher. In our public meetings, we heard a lot from people in sports programs in the town, people who would like to see the school system support the town. The baseball field, the soccer field for lacrosse, we had a big debate on the basketball court. It costs more money to do what we asked for. What we wanted was not just a basketball court for adults, but a court that middle school kids. You have to have a wider court, and you go crossways, so you could have 2 new courts, a little bit more money. Hidden little things to add to that. A student cafeteria will be for performing arts, and the school has been set up so the public can come in and the rest of the school can be private. So a lot of thoughtful time was spent based on input and advice. I want to pay tribute to Emily and the staff. When they put together the proposal to Mass State Building Committee, and I went into one of the meetings before their board of directors, and people looking around and saying, Westwood? Westwood's getting money? There's desperate school systems in Massachusetts. And they're going to talk about giving us, I think it's 17 out of 100 towns got them. And one of the reasons was they came out and they visited the Hamlin School. 70 years old, made out of wood. So those people who want to upgrade the code to make the closets a little bigger, forget it. It's a miracle that our dedicated teachers keep it alive. Open the windows. I mean, it's tremendous that it's been functioning and doing well in our other school that we're merging in with. It was built as a bomb shelter. I did a sign one time when the high school was being built, and it said, Westwood, your property value is dependent on quality of schools. I came to Westwood for education, many of you did. We're not asking for niceties, as somebody said, that people don't want to spend any more money, niceties. The other big thing has been brought up very nicely by Pam Dukeman, who's about to finish paying for the high school. Okay, so that's a huge burden off of the taxpayers. So what new information we're going to be asking for, new taxes, that's a big, huge change. But again, I want to thank you all for the time you spent. It's a compliment to all the time that's been spent on this, to have you look at it so carefully and give us advice. So thank you.
Thank you. Before I get to the public, let me give FinCom members a final opportunity before we hear from the public. Do you have any comments, any further questions you have? Let me open it up.
Room first?
Yeah, do the room first this time.
I'll speak.
Go.
Presumably folks can hear me. But thank you, Emily and Maya and the whole team. I mean, I think we've been listening to a lot of this on FinCom for whether we're here a year, 2 years, 3 years. And I'm just amazed at the thoroughness of the process, at how transparent you've been, how you've constantly come to us with updates, how you've taken into consideration the community, and how you've really designed a building to have a max impact on the community. I don't live in Hamlin and Deerfield. I live in Downey, but I can see, where the impact is of moving students over, creating some space in Downey, where the fields are, the summer programs, how much of an impact and how it's been built to really impact across the whole community. And like many others, I moved to this town 8 years ago and selected it, not growing up in Massachusetts because of the schools, before I had kids. And my daughter just entered school this year at Downey, and it's quite an amazing experience. And so people are moving here because of the schools, but our home values are also going up because of the schools and where they are. And I would just like go back to the numbers a little bit and just say, you know, we talk about the project being 87.8 million. We have that reimbursement of around 8.2 million, which brings it to 69.5, but you have to take into account the 41.7 million to fix the schools. So the net effect of all of it is really 27.7 million for a brand new school, as opposed to fixing up old schools. And so that's kind of my comments and observations. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody on Zoom? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, so I think, I'm sorry, Tom.
You know, one quick point too, and you know, Maya mentioned it, you know, in terms of maintenance costs going forward, and you know, as Mike mentioned, the delta breaks down to about 50 cents a day, and George Laham has beat that drum a number of times. And, which is great, because that's what it comes down to, but as Emily also said, it's an apples and oranges comparison because of the new construction and what that provides versus putting the Band-Aid, and you still have insufficient rooms and whatnot. So, but some of the other things though, but I don't know if there's been, you know, projections made in terms of the higher maintenance costs or difference, higher maintenance costs maybe of the Band-Aid version versus a more efficient new construction building. And then other things like revenue opportunities with maybe the gym and the fields. And, you know, as Mike knows for many years, that gyms were a problem in town and still are a challenge. And also the Westwood Rec Department, you know, prior to COVID, the summer camp program was a huge program. In fact, I think that there were big waiting lists because they just didn't have enough facility and space to accommodate all the campers. And really, I recall it being a pretty big revenue generator. So, you know, I'm just wondering if you put it all together, does that even close the gap further?
Well, you've thrown a lot of variables in there, and so I don't want to sort of speak off the top of my head about that. I mean, certainly we have had the rec department as part of the conversation all along. You know, what do they need, and how can we work with them? I will say this, that I do think an important point is that if we continue to have old facilities that we have to maintain, it diminishes our ability to do necessary maintenance on the buildings we have right now that are in good shape, right? So, you know, our capital budget annually in the school department is a little bit over $1 million. Martha Jones and Downey were fully renovated in the early 2000s. They're in good shape, but you do have to maintain your buildings. And if we're having to divert that annual capital funding to Hamlin, to Deerfield, then that eats into our ability to do what we need to do for some of these other buildings. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that worries me, that, you know, if this project weren't to pass and then we say, well, we could do a $41 million base repair, that isn't going to happen next week. That would be a whole other project to figure out how to do that, and a whole process. And in the meantime, we have to continue to keep our buildings functioning because kids need to go to school. And so, you know, that's the kind of assessment that I find myself doing as well.
Great. I'm sorry, one last final point, George, real quick.
You may make it.
And this kind of speaks to what Charlie was talking about earlier in terms of the condition of the Hamlin. And my understanding is that it was, as Charlie said, the condition of the Hamlin was part of the reason that Westwood was chosen one of 15 communities out of 82 applicants that got chosen because of the condition of the Hamlin. But also, I thought my understanding was that it wasn't a neglected building. It was a building that was 50 years old that was actually cared for well, maintained well. So it showed a town and a community that did all the right things and got everything we possibly could out of that building.
Yeah, I think,
And so that if we were invited into the program, my understanding was that there would be confidence from the MSBA that the town would take care of that new toy, and it wouldn't be a bad investment.
no, absolutely, and I would comment on a couple of things here. So, I mean, Hamlin is nearly 70 years old at this point.
Sorry,
And
thank
I'm proud of the fact that when you walk into Hamlin, we're doing a good job taking care of it. The floors are shiny, you know, we're doing a good job making it be sort of a clean, building for kids to be in and keeping it safe. But we're at the point now where, despite, I think, very good maintenance efforts and investing at a reasonable level, the systems have just reached the end of their useful life. Like, that is where we are. When the last time the school department did a building project, 20 years ago, with the now, I still call it the new high school, 20 years later, because I remember the old one. And I remember at that time that we made a commitment to residents. We promised residents that if they invested in that high school building, that we would take care of that building. And 20 years later, nearly 20 years later, I believe that we have done that. People walk in to the current Westwood High School, folks from other districts come in to meet with me. They ask me when we opened because they think it was, last year. We've done a great job with that building. And the for this project, for the Hamlin Deerfield project, factored into our reimbursement rate is an additional 1.93% over our base reimbursement rate that the MSBA granted to Westwood because of our demonstrated maintenance record. It is an indication of their confidence in us and that this is a good investment to invest in Westwood.
Thank you. I am cognizant that I would like to get to some of the questions that the public has, and so I want to start that process. Oh, I'm sorry, George.
George Laham has been waiting
comment there.
patiently. Go ahead, George.
Oh, thank you.
Go right ahead.
Tom brought up a point that I applaud his comment. I never even thought of it. If somebody doesn't agree with this project, we're still going to have to pay $42 million, which we've all discussed. But the capital budget is only $1 million. So where would that $42 million have to come from? We'd have to do another. I mean, is it an override? Where would that come from? And that's just to bring it to code for 2021. That's not to say in 2 more years it would need several other projects or funding to bring it to code then as well. So where does that $42 million come from?
Yeah, that would be another debt exclusion, George, just like we are here. And in addition, I think we also note on our projected population growth charts that the current Hamlin will be too small for the projected population growth in about 10 years. So we would also be looking at an addition or modular trailers onto Hamlin to accommodate the growth. Is that correct?
So,
yes.
So
That's
even
not
the
included
patch
in the
job,
41.
41. I'm sorry. Even the patch job at $41 million is actually just throwing money into the wind because it's going to be pointless in a few years anyway. So spending the extra 28 is the only way to save the money for the long term, or best use the money in the long term.
George,
Is
thank
what
you.
I'm
At this point,
understanding.
the FinCom members will have a chance to deliberate if we get a motion to approve this article. So one of the things I really want to do is give the public a chance. There probably have been some people very patiently waiting, and I want to thank them. As Jane said, though, Jane, they have to identify their
Yes.
name and address.
They need to put their first and last name and their address.
Okay, so do you want to start that process, Jane?
I can start with Deb Conant for Strasser Ave. She says here, you stated up to 18 million. There is no guarantee to the amount to be reimbursed. So this, I'm going to take my mask off. So this number is not concrete. The article states a lifespan of at least 50 years. Looking at the disrepair so many of our buildings have been in, what do you have in place to preserve the life of this building, as 50 years is a low number? We are looking at an additional 70+ million in projects with the Sheehan Fire Station Middle School. What will this look like to residents tax-wise as these move forward? wouldn't it be more efficient to reduce the bells and whistles of the school and put money into more teachers, aides, educational materials, etc.? Because better to support our phenomenal educators and our quest to be within the top 10 schools again. Lastly, will the bond be worded to remove the assessed value per home once the bond is paid off?
So I can speak to the 18.2 million. That actually is a guaranteed amount. We say up to because if we spend the full 87.7 million, they will reimburse the full 18.2 million. If we don't spend the 87.7 million, they just reimburse what we spend, essentially. So that's why we're saying up to 18.2. But that 18.2, as Emily mentioned, is contractual. We have a contract with the MSBA for that amount, clearly subject to town meeting approval and the town vote approval. But assuming that we pass those hurdles, then they are committed to providing us up to 18.2 million, depending on how much the project spends. I'm just going back to some of those questions.
Sorry, it's been dismissed. You have to go to a different tab.
It's been dismissed. Hang on one second. Okay. The disrepair of many of our buildings and the lifespan of 50 years. So 50 years is the average useful life of a building. That's what's used in the market when you're looking at construction. Our buildings are 70 years old, so I would say that we are beyond average. And if that's any indication, then this building should last at least 50 years, if not beyond, given how well we maintain our buildings. So I think 50 years is a very reasonable number to use. I think that was the point that Debbie was making. I can't speak, we're sort of speaking about this project right now. I know that there's other town projects, so I can't really speak to that and what will happen next. If this project doesn't pass, then quite frankly, I'm not sure what will pass going forward, particularly with respect to Sheehan. But right now, we're just kind of focusing on this project, and I'm really trying to address those questions. Wouldn't it be more efficient to reduce the bells and whistles? Again, I really don't think that there are very many bells and whistles if you look at schools that we're building nowadays. These are the tools that we need to educate our children in the manner that Westwood should be educating its children, in the manner that Westwood wants to deliver this education. It's beautiful. Yes, it is a beautiful school. But that doesn't mean that it's incredibly over the top, because it's not. We've had many, many conversations with our contractors about that and our architects about that. And they know that we have made cuts to this. They know we've changed materials to get this number down. And again, the cost per square foot number says it all. And finally, will the bond be worded to remove the assessed value per home once the bond is paid off? I think, Pam, that's a question for you. I don't believe that's how the bond is structured, but I defer to you.
Well, I think she's indicating the vote at town meeting. The vote at town meeting and the ballot says that it's a debt exemption. So Proposition 2.5 is a law on the books in Massachusetts. A debt exemption is one piece of Proposition 2.5. So it's within the law, as I explained before, that we have to stop raising in taxes the money towards the bond when the bond ends. We're not allowed to continue that. We can't say, well, we're still raising the money, we'll put it towards something else. The law of 2.5 and the debt exemption requires that to happen. So we will not raise the money once the bond ends. As we said, the high school ends FY23, and then that money is no longer raised in taxes. And that I would point out to people, we show that full exempt debt amount that we looked at earlier. That's in our town meeting book each year. We show that chart. We talk about what do we have in exempt debt. That's in the book that gets mailed to every house in town, that you can see exactly what it is that we're raising for the exempt debt.
And I would just make one additional comment. I mean, you'll find no bigger fan of the teachers in the district than me, and I think they are extraordinary. And I would just say that in the hiring process, when I think about how we retain talented, skilled teachers, I think that this is part of the equation. You know, we want to make sure that we're a district that can continue to attract high-quality candidates to Westwood, that we can keep them here, and I want teachers to be able to have the tools that they need to do their best work.
Again, we have a few people in the Q&A, and they have not identified themselves by first and last name and address. So we would very much like to read your feedback, but we need you to put your name and address in the Q&A, please. I can give you another minute to do that. I think there's 3 people who have multiple comments.
That's a requirement by law, isn't it? Yeah, that's a requirement we can't get around. The same way when you want to get up and speak at town meeting, you really have to give your name and address to be recognized. So as much as we would like to get some input from the public, if you want us to read your comments, please put your name and address in.
Okay. I have Sandra Castellini, and she's from 54 Birch Street. And can I be called on? Oh, this person would like to speak. Would you like me to? She's in the attendee.
I will give her, yes, we'll give her a
Okay,
couple minutes to
Sandra, let me
speak.
put you in.
Yes.
Sandra, take yourself off mute and
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
we can.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity. Sandra Castellini, 54 Birch Street. I really enjoyed the presentation from the schools. I think everything that they've talked about, community engagement, people move here for the schools, it's spot on. My question to them and potentially finance committee or school committee if they're here is, how has the town rallied around this need to improve our schools? The schools went out, and applied for reimbursement. Has the town offered any funding or found any additional funding for them? Has the town guaranteed to take a look at the tax increases so that this burden that we are taking on with open eyes can be reduced? Because when I hear how the town puts their project together, looking at project, Proposition 2.5, it seems like we're always assuming increases, and I just feel like people would be more willing to be on board with this wonderful project if the town could make some guarantees and talk about their review of services that they may no longer need, or, we're in a pandemic economic crisis. We seem to not be making any changes during that. And now, I just think we're squeezing the middle class by talking about this very important project. But we know, even looking at the capital improvement plan, that people are already going to be thinking about Sheehan, about Town Hall, about Senior Center. And, at what point are you actually, squeezing people out of the town?
Thank you.
Is there anybody from the town that wants to?
Pam and Chris are on. Would anyone like to comment?
From the town? You want town administrators? Pam or Chris, any comments?
I would just point out, we work obviously very closely with the schools on all their projects, all their capital needs, and most importantly, their annual operating budget. We devote the bulk of our budget each year at town meeting is to the schools. That is what the services people want in town. This project, we looked at the annual debt service is just over $3 million a year. So to try to fund this within Prop 2.5, if that's what was asked, we would need to come up with $3 million in our budget. So I think, when we go through our operating budget each year on the municipal side, 70% of our budget is spent on police, fire, and DPW. That's where all our money is. So if we needed to go in and try to find $3 million, we'd be looking at those departments. Our police budget is about $4 million. Our fire budget's about $4 million. To fund $3 million of additional debt, we would need to lay off half of our police force or our fire force. And I don't think that's what people want for the services of the community. If we try to look at the school budget and scale that back to fund $3 million, we'd be looking at, that's probably, 50 teachers. And certainly that's not what people want. So the $3 million, this is a large item. That's what debt exemptions are designed for. Again, we looked at the chart. The town has, not had a school debt exemption in more than 20 years. And the only other one we've had in a 20-year period is the library project. So we certainly look always to fund our operating budgets to the level that the community wants. We look to fund as many projects and capital needs, equipment and buildings and maintenance within our operating budgets. We're always making choices on that, within Prop 2.5. But for, very large projects, which this is, the debt exemption is a tool, and we would not be asking for that tool or going to the community if we didn't need to. It's really the only way that we can fund this project.
And I would just add that, as we've had conversations years ago about what the different long-term facility needs were in town, that folks on the town side really agreed that if the school department was able to get into the MSBA program, that it would be the priority of the town to support the school project and to move the school project forward as its top priority. And that is what has happened, and I'm quite appreciative of that.
We haven't got people identifying themselves, so that's it.
Okay, I would really, I actually would encourage more public participation, but if we don't get the name and address, I'm not allowed, I can't recognize it. So at this point in time, I think I'm going to basically say that the questions and comments from the public and press are over, and we are about to close our public hearing. We do have to go through a roll call to close it. We will then go, the folks here are more than welcome to watch our deliberations. Everything is in the open here. This is not like going into executive session, so we will be open as we have our deliberations. So one final thing I want to say is I do want to thank the work that the school, the superintendent has done, that Maya has done. I think that Pam and Chris have done. I think on FinCom, it's been a remarkably intense process. I just want to remind everybody, Finance and Warrant Commission is a volunteer board. And I think this is some of the questions that have been raised by people. That's the role of the Finance and Warrant Commission, to look into this, to try and ask the heavy questions, and then as part of our deliberations, to make a recommendation to the town warrant in terms of what we think is best for the town. But it does require a lot of analysis, a lot of work, and a lot of input from everybody, and that's one thing I think we should all be very positive about, because it has been a very open, intense process. So with that, Jane, can we get can I do a roll call to close the public hearing?
You need to make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'm going to make a motion to close the public hearing. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bill?
Here, or what do I say, yes?
Jim?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
George Hertz?
Yes.
Peter Ittig?
Yes, to close the hearing.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
George Laham?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
And Alex?
Yes.
That's Mike.
Okay, so we have a motion approved?
Motion's approved.
Okay, so now we are going to, I guess we don't read the motion until after we've done our deliberation, is that correct?
That's right.
So this is open. Do anybody need if you need to take a 2 or 3 minute break, please feel free to do for those in the room here. I know those at home obviously can do that. But let me just open it up, let's start our deliberations, start our discussions, and get some input before we get to the, vote we have to take tonight.
George, would you like members on Zoom to unmute?
Yes, why don't you unmute so we can, I would ask you not to talk over each other. It's one of the challenges we have with Zoom. Let's respect each other, but let's open it up so we can have our normal, vibrant conversation here on FinCom. Anybody want to start?
Go ahead and start, George. This is Chris Parita. To me, it comes down to answering two questions. The first question, is the town financially in a position to take on this debt without significantly adversely affecting our ability to do future projects? And I think the presentations we've seen from Pam answer that question in the affirmative. Right now, we're in a good position to get a very good interest rate on a long-term bond. I think future projects will also benefit from our taking out this additional debt and paying it off. That will show the rating agencies that we are capable of doing that. So this is one of the best times to do this project, actually. So that question is yes. The second question I asked myself, is this project necessary at this time? And the school committee has concluded that the Hamlin and Deerfield buildings are educationally deficient or need upgrading. And I believe the select board has also affirmed that conclusion. So not to diminish our role, but I personally am loath to second guess the elected policy boards in making that kind of a conclusion, especially one involving the education of the district. Renovating the schools is an option, but as we've been seeing, it triggers substantial costs to upgrade each of those buildings. At the end of the day, it leaves us with a renovated, but still educationally deficient building. Now, George Laham has made a point that he's attended that school, so did I. And in the 1960s, I remember using the back of the stage as a classroom. I took French there, I took music there. So indeed, one could say that that building was educationally deficient when it began. So leaving us with a renovated school still doesn't address all our problems. And I would say that a renovated school would not last as long as a brand new one in terms of going out 30, 40, 50 years. A new building does address the town's desires to have more indoor and outdoor sports facilities, even though that's not directly connected to our educational programs. That is what the town wants. So it does meet our desires. The new building also gives the town a great feather in our cap in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. I personally love the idea, the concept of the geothermal heating and cooling system. Could we have done more in terms of photovoltaic, solar panels on the roof? And yes, but I think the building committee was wise to look closely at the cost of that. That's one example in which they said, no, we're not going to recommend a Mercedes-Benz type building where we only need a Buick type building. So are there aspects of this project that I don't like personally? Sure. On balance, I think that it's a good project, and I will vote in favor of it.
Thank you, Chris.
Peter Iddick has his hand raised. You can go right ahead, Peter.
Yes, thank you. I do have some comments. This is a very expensive project, much more expensive than our last large school override for the high school, and more expensive than all of the comparison schools that were shown to us. It is probably the largest override ever in Westwood. State reimbursement is low in comparison with the high school due to various choices that have been made. Property taxes on homes will need to go up to cover this, and those costs will last for 30 years. This is in addition to the 3% tax increase that was approved at the town meeting in May. and this will be a substantial tax increase that will be a problem for some residents. Also, due to changes in tax rules, this increase is no longer offset by the federal income tax deduction that previously covered perhaps 20 or 30% of the cost of such increases for most of us. That makes this tax increase more expensive for most taxpayers. I am particularly concerned about the impact of a large tax increase on our seniors who are uniquely vulnerable to such increases. Large school overrides have sometimes been accompanied by a concession of some sort for seniors. Seniors are about a quarter of the registered voters in Westwood, are sensitive to tax increases, generally don't have children in the schools, and they tend to disproportionately vote at elections of the kind required for an override. There is no concession this time. At the time of the last large school override for the high school, the town offered a concession to seniors in the form of a proposed partial senior tax exemption. This probably helped to get the override passed. That proposed senior exemption was approved by this commission and by the town meeting in 2000. That exemption was never implemented, as it was of a type that was not authorized by the legislature until 2006. The state also offered partial state reimbursement for towns adopting that exemption. Westwood has ignored it. There is a citizen-sponsored warrant article pending that would attempt to fix this, but the select board postponed that article until next year. In my opinion, the senior exemption that was passed in 2000 represents a promise that was not kept. Also, I am uncomfortable with the justification for this project, and I am particularly uncomfortable with the planned obsolescence of the school designs. We've been told that the schools are designed to have a useful life of 40 to 50 years. Since we have several schools in Westwood, this means that we can expect to be continually replacing schools on a perpetual rotating cycle. This also means a replacement with an override and a tax increase every few years. For example, we've been told that we will soon be asked to approve another override to rebuild the Sheehan School for another possibly 60 million or so. In my experience, colleges and universities generally do not do this rotating replacement of buildings. College lecture halls are generally not torn down when they need a new furnace or roof repair or plumbing repairs. This is also true for homes in Westwood. Homeowners do not generally tear down the house when they need a new furnace or new roof or new windows. I believe that our schools should be built to last, and that the only good reason to build a new school should be for necessary additional capacity. That appears to not be the issue here. In fact, we'll be left with a surplus school at Deerfield after this project is complete. For all of these reasons, I will vote to postpone this article. I believe that it should be taken up next May at the same time as the article on senior exemptions. Finally, I would like to remind voters who may be listening that the override election at the ballot box is on Tuesday, October 26th. This is the week after the town meeting and a week before the general election day in November. A mail ballot may be requested from the town clerk. Thank you.
I would just like to make a couple observations. I think this committee has received presentations from the town assistant manager or finance director, Pam Dukeman, emphasizing that Westwood is basically far above and beyond some local communities, our sister communities, in terms of the tax relief we have offered to our senior citizens. I just want to emphasize that. Those presentations have been made here. Second observation I want to make is there are a lot of capital needs this town has, and yet I look over the past several years, and I think as a town we have done a very, very good job, whether it's in the library we're sitting in here, whether it's the fire station in Islington, whether it's the new police station, the fact that we're going to have a new library in Islington. And, you know, buildings do have a life cycle. And one of the challenges for a town like Westwood is to somehow find ways to address those needs, whether it's the schools or the municipal buildings. And that's one of the challenges we have as a town. There are a lot of needs we can't meet, and there are some needs we can meet. And I think we as a town have to balance it. One of the issues for Proposition 2.5 is the voters have a right to decide. They have a right to decide at town meeting, and they have a right to decide in the special election we have to go through. They will have their opportunity. But right now, what is in front of us is a particular article, or there will be an article in front of us dealing specifically with the schools. I think some of the other issues that you raised are not on the agenda tonight, and frankly, may be at a future town meeting. So thank you for your comments. Any other observations or concerns or people want to talk about before we might be entertaining a motion? Tom?
George, I have one final comment. Thank you. Thank you again, and just a couple of quick points. The concern about schools should be built to last. Well, I was wrong when I said Hamlin was 50 years old. As Emily said, it's 70 years old. As we talked about before, the town and the school they've done a great job of maintaining the buildings. So it's shown that it's a good investment, and it's an interesting story. The high school is considered new still by a lot of people that walk into it and ask when we opened. From a cost standpoint, I thought it was also a good point where it's more of an apples to apples comparison when you go based on square footage. And at $621 per square foot, we're between $31 and $74 per square foot less than those other towns. So the last point, I think, and hopefully the last lesson is that I think we should learn from the mistakes of the town of Lincoln when they were approved for the program and would have, their project would have cost them $23 million back in 2012. And when they did not vote for the program, they knocked on the door again 3 times and were not invited back, and then now they're in the middle of that project and it's going to cost them $93 million. So I think that as a town, I think we should learn from the mistakes of maybe some other communities. And then also I think that I can't speak to what the new school would look like in terms of use by people in the town, but I know that the new high school, that track is used by all sorts of people all the time, and I'm sure, in the fields and all of that. So I would think that some of the other bells and whistles, if you will, of the Hamlin project would be utilized by many. So thank you.
George Leham has raised his hand.
I had hit the raised the hand before Tom spoke, and he stole most of my thunder because he basically said 50% of what I wanted to say. I also, we've all talked about why we moved to Westwood, or why we've come back to Westwood, or why, I've been in the town 35 years and I came back to raise my family here. But I'm an accountant and I'll look at it from a numbers point. You say the real estate taxes are too high, or in the standard deduction may have been changed. I'm sorry, the real estates are too high and you can't take the full deduction, but the standard deduction is compensated for that. And I think if you moved to town 40, 50 years ago, you probably bought your house for $200,000. And right now that same house is worth $1 million. So, it's a return on investment. And as a finance committee, when I joined, I was told we have a fiduciary responsibility. And I don't think it is fiduciary responsible or financially responsible to, let $18.2 million go out the door when a project is inevitable. $42 million in code repairs is inevitable. 18 million losing that when the delta is $185 a year per average house. It's kind of like a no-brainer, and I think we have a financial responsibility to the town and to, the future of the town, which are the children, to give them the best education we can. And the only way to do that is to have the best teachers we can and the best facilities. And this is part of it. When you sell your house one day and, you move out, you bought it for $200,000, or, some people may have bought it for $50,000 and it's worth $1 million or $1.5 million. There's your investment and there's it all back to you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Or?
Yeah, I just want to sort of expound on that. I don't think we're asking to build a new school just because of a heating system. As I said, for 70 years, I think we've got our money's worth out of it. The difference being in that part of the new school is, unlike a college, we don't have other facilities to move the students to. So it doesn't become functional to keep the same school, rehab it, and then where do you put the kids? On top of that, even though the structures in your college or most homes stand 60, 70 years, probably every 20 or 30 years you get a new owner and they gut rehab it anyway. So I look at it as we're doing a gut rehab without the convenience of leaving the kids in the school in the neighborhood. That being said, my concern is that we're not looking at the big picture. I've been on the board for 8 or 9 years, and the fire department's been on the 5-year plan for the 8 or 9 years that I've been on the board. We keep taking little pieces and fund them, and we pat ourselves on the back and say we're doing a great job in town, and we are. We've managed everything to date, but again, then to Peter's point, our taxes have gone up, but taxes and appraisals, valuations are different things to different people. Everybody has a spending limit at some point. They have to make that own decision. We can't make that decision for them. But I think we have to have a big discussion of, are we going to do a new fire station, a Sheehan, a town hall? Those are just some of the big projects, and find out what the cost expenditure is and when we are going to plan them, because we can't do 4 or 5 projects at the same time every year going forward. And I mean, our last project was what the Downey School fell off 10 years ago, so it was put in place 20 years before that. So we're having a lull and then a big financial hit, a lull and a big financial hit. I think we have to plan a little bit better.
Okay. All right, any more comments, observations? Tom, you ready to
Yes, I am.
call for a motion? Do I have a motion on this article?
I'd like to make a motion.
I would second that motion.
Seconded. Tom, you want to make a motion?
To see if the town will vote to appropriate, borrow, or transfer from available funds an amount of money to be expended under the direction of the school building committee to pay costs of design, constructing, equipping, and furnishing a new Paul R. Hamlin Elementary School to be located at 790 Gay Street in Westwood, Massachusetts, including costs of site work and all other costs incidental and related thereto, which school facility shall have anticipated useful life as an educational facility for the instruction of school children of at least 50 years, and for which the town may be eligible for a school construction grant from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA. The town acknowledges that the MSBA's grant program is a non-entitlement discretionary program based on need, as determined by the MSBA, and project costs the town incurs in excess of any grant approved by and received from the MSBA shall be the sole responsibility of the town. Any grant that the town may receive from the MSBA for the project shall not exceed the lesser of 39 3/500% of eligible approved project costs as determined by the MSBA, or the total maximum grant amount determined by the MSBA, or to take any other action relative thereto. Motion that the town appropriates $84,610,386 to pay costs of designing, constructing, equipping, and furnishing a new Paul R. Hamlin Elementary School to be located at 790 Gay Street in Westwood, Massachusetts, including costs of site work and all other costs incidental and related thereto the project, which school facility shall have an anticipated useful life as an educational facility for the instruction of school children for at least 50 years, and for the town may be eligible for a grant from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA, said amount to be expended under the direction of the School Building Committee. To meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Select Board, is authorized to borrow said amount under General Law C-44 or pursuant to any other enabling authority. The amount appropriated by this vote shall be expended in addition to the $1,750,000 appropriated to pay the feasibility study costs related to the project under Article 14 of the warrant at the annual town meeting held on May 30th, 2018, and the $1,460,000 appropriated to pay design costs of the project under Article 13 of the warrant at the annual town meeting held on May 3rd, 2021, resulting in a total cost of the project of $87,820,386. The town acknowledges that the MSBA's grant program is a non-entitlement discretionary program based on need as determined by the MSBA, and any project costs the town incurs in excess of any grant approved by and received from the MSBA shall be the sole responsibility of the town. Provided further that any grant that the town may receive from the MSBA for the project shall not exceed the lesser of 39 3/35% of eligible approved project costs as determined by the MSBA, or the total maximum grant amount determined by the MSBA, and that the amount of borrowing authorized pursuant to this vote shall be reduced by any grant amount set forth in the project funding agreement that may be executed between the town and the MSBA. No amounts shall be borrowed or expended pursuant to this vote unless the town shall have voted to exempt the amounts required for the payment of interest in principal on the borrowing authorized by this vote from the limitations on taxes imposed by General Law C-5921C, Prop 2.5. Any premium received upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with General Law C-4420, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount.
Now I'd like to second.
Okay, so we need to do a roll
Yes,
call
we're going to
vote?
do our roll call vote. Bill Bruce,
Yes.
Jim Ferraro,
Yes.
Lauren Fitzpatrick.
I vote to postpone this.
That's not the motion on the table. The motion is to move this forward.
Could you explain
You
the
vote yes or no.
No.
Mike Gay,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Peter Ittig.
Could you explain what we're voting on now?
The article that was
Voting on the
just
main
read,
motion.
Peter.
Thank you, George.
The article that was just read, that's what we're voting on.
Okay, and the consequence of a no vote is postponement, is that correct?
No, do you have a motion in front of you? You may vote yes or no to support the motion.
All right, my vote is no.
Fine.
Caitlin Jerzak,
Yes.
Tom Kilgariff,
Yes.
George Laham,
Yes.
Christina Paduitz,
Yes.
Christopher Pareda,
Yes.
and Alex Yale.
Yes.
That motion passes with 10 in favor and 2 opposed.
Okay. All right, let me just make a couple, we have maybe a few more minutes here, just a couple of comments I want to make. One, I'd like to thank the members of the FinCom for the work they put into this. This has been a fairly intensive project. The quality of the questions that came from FinCom members, both to the Special Building Committee and to the town, to me were some of the best questions I've seen FinCom come up with. And a lot of those questions came from new members as well as some of the older members on the board. So I want to thank you. Number two, I clearly would state, I think on behalf of the board, thank you for the number of meetings and sessions you've held. I think you still have a big challenge in front of you in terms of the town meeting we have coming up and in terms of the vote we have to take, the special election. So I wish you folks the best as you pursue this process. We do have to approve the minutes from last, whatever, when were they, Jane?
September 8th minutes.
September 8th,
They were in
which I
your
hope you've
packet.
thoroughly been through. So can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
I get a second?
Second.
Thanks, Ellen.
Take a roll call,
I
Jane?
do. Bill?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Mike Gay?
Yes.
George Hertz?
Yes.
Sorry. Peter Iddig?
Yes.
Caitlin Jerzak?
Yes.
Tom Kilgareth?
Yes.
George Laham?
Yes.
Christina Patrick? Christina?
Yes.
Chris Pareda?
Yes.
And Alex?
Yes.
Thank you.
Passed. Okay, before we take the final adjournment roll call vote, I want to ask Tom a question here. Tom, you went through the Westwood school system?
Yes, I did, George.
I just want to say, by the amount of reading you have done tonight, it's apparent to me that you deserve an applause. And all those wonderful summer reading signs I've seen, I really wish that the schools would maybe put one on your lawn, because well-earned and well-deserved. Tom, seriously, thank you so very much. I know this
FinCom
was
All-Star.
a
Thank
lot
you,
of effort
George.
and patience
A's,
on your
B's,
part.
C's. I was in the top 3.
All right. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn the
Before we
meeting?
adjourn, I have a question for new business, which was on the agenda.
Fine, Peter, what's your new business?
My question concerns the write-up that is, there's usually a paragraph of comments attributed to the commission in addition to reporting the vote tally of the members, and that goes on the printed warrant. So the printed warrant generally includes a paragraph of commentary attributed to the commission in addition to the vote tally, which we heard a moment ago. I believe that the members should at least see those comments before they are printed. That's before they are printed as the recommendations of the commission, but this has not been the case in my experience. I would like to make a motion as follows.
Peter, that there is no motion on the table right now. The procedure in the past has been, and we will follow it again, that we generally assign, a vote's been taken, there's been thorough discussion, we assign responsibility to do the write-up. In this case, I think I'm going to volunteer to work with Jane to do the write-up and make sure, since, as you know, in the past, I've done write-ups for many of the articles this town has had to deal with, and I think that Jane and I will put together a write-up that reflects the recommendations of this board.
And just for clarity, the discretion is at the chair for the write-up, and Diane has already done quite a bit of work on that, and will convey your comment to her, but that is at the discretion of the chair.
And Jane and I will work to get that taken care of.
Are they going to have a blurb of the opposition?
Yeah.
The write-ups always reflect what the members vote.
But Diane and
Yes,
George are going to do that.
Diane
You're
and
not going
George
to
are
ask
gonna do that.
Peter or Laura?
No.
No,
I'm not going to do that.
Diane and George will
Okay.
do the write-up.
I think we accept responsibility for making sure that it reflects some of the concerns that were raised.
100%.
I've always taken that very, very seriously. It's part of the responsibility, either serving as vice chair or chair, to make sure we reflect the opinions of this board. And frankly, I actually wish we'd had more public comment. I'm personally, it's one of the things I've struggled with over the years. We cannot seem to get, no matter what we do, public participation. And sometimes I don't really know how to do it. I mean, they have to identify themselves, but I wish we could get more public comments. Whether they like what we're doing or not like what we're doing, it's important to hear. So with that, are we ready to adjourn?
We just need a motion to adjourn.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Get a second?
Thank you.
And once again, we have to do our roll call vote.
Bill?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
George Hertz?
Yes.
Peter Iddig?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
George Laham?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
And Alex?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank everybody, and thanks to Pam and Chris, who I sometimes forget to thank. You were in front of us. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Great job.
Tommy.